You're muted, Sharon.
Good morning. Is Heather going to dismantle the chat and we'll just have questions and Q&A then for later?
Yes.
I think we did. Okay. All right. So welcome everybody. Good morning to our third part of our Where We Are and Where We're Going series with instructor Christopher Tangren. Thank you everybody for joining us this morning. I think it's 10 o'clock. So without further ado, we're going to get started. Christopher, do you want to introduce yourself and give a little bio? But first, let me thank my fellow associations. We have today Hometown Association. We have Illini Valley. We have the Quincy Association and us, the Oak Park Association. So thank you everybody for working so collaboratively. It's great that we're able to bring these kinds of programming to our members, and we do it because we collaborate. So thank you. So with that, Christopher, why don't you give a little bio and then we'll get started.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you, Sharon, Jay, Heather, and Megan, our respective association executives, for helping to facilitate and put on the program for you today. This is what will be our last official installment of information sessions in advance of the NAR mandate effective date. So happy to be with you today to kind of hopefully put a few reminders out there and then talk about some of the sort of last minute or 11th hour information that we have as associations and as for our members. So I'm not going to belabor my intro. I'm assuming most of you have heard from me before, good or bad. But again, my privilege to use the involvement and the knowledge that I have to share that with the members of our four associations collectively and work to help keep the bar of our professionalism at a high level. So thank you for the opportunity again. We're happy to and proud to be able to collaborate, as Sharon mentioned. So, all right. So today we're at the where we're going stage of things. And so we're going to talk about the last minute sort of where we're going now. We should pretty much know where we are, but I will just glaze through a few things about the mandate just to make sure that for those who maybe haven't been paying attention, not to leave you out or behind on some of these things. I don't want to talk over folks, but at the same time, I understand those who have heard me before or who have been paying attention. Some of this early material in my presentation today will be remind. So got to do the housekeeping, of course. Today is a final view and having an understanding and an approach to the class action lawsuit settlement and the related business practice decisions. Based on sound business decisions, realtors can choose to provide knowledgeable and professional consumer client experience while protecting the public in our respective brokerages. Today, we're going to work to provide ideas, so that we can all be better. Like I said, a quick background on how we arrived at this place. We're going to talk and articulate as to what's happening in terms of working with our buyer clients and of course the public, providing guidance on what things are going to look like after August 17th, providing resources that we have to help us better articulate our value, and continue the discussion on why the sky is not falling. So, kind of a quick and loose agenda. I'm going to quickly cover disclaimers and then some opening thoughts, and then we'll quickly get through the current insights and then move into resources. I will spend a good amount of time today talking about some of the new Illinois Realtors buyer brokerage forms and auxiliary ancillary forms, and briefly remind everybody about the MLS, talk about some script ideas for our brokerages to work with their agents, and then a quick and last touch on professional development, office policies, and then we'll close up. Of course, in our format, we try to handle Q&A at the end, so staff will help me at the end after we quit recording. We will move into Q&A and try to address as many of the questions as we can that come up. All right, today's disclaimers. I'm going to put up our antitrust warning statement. Although we are not openly speaking at the moment, I do have to remind everybody of the fact that we are competitors and that we are not to be discussing conversations about our competitors or with our competitors. We're to make independent business decisions for independent companies, and we're to comply with all the regulatory entities that govern over us. And then just a reminder, the session is copyrighted, so reproducing or using my slides is not permitted without my permission. So please talk to me if you need any of the content that I have. I can always pull content out and email it as might be requested. Just a reminder, I'm a humble practitioner, and I will be using opinions, stories, and examples today to help illustrate, but in no way should my opinions be considered the only solutions or methodologies to conduct business or create policy. They're just my opinions. All right, a few general thoughts. Hoping the session will inspire and continue discussion at our respective brokerages. Today's topics are about things that can no longer be ignored. I have examples of brokers asking questions in sessions that really indicate to me that they have not been paying attention to what's been going on. So we are, this is the 11th and a half hour. It's time to be ready and stop ignoring any of this. Make sure that you are well versed, because the public is getting well versed now. So we always need to be ahead of the public knowledge curve when it comes to our own stuff, so to say. So again, it's time to address these things, time to be proactive, not reactive. And my reminder that we need to stop saying things like out here and over there. Practice in, real estate is a statewide practice under statewide regulation. And we have to be careful about what we tell the public about how we practice. And we need to not tell the public that we do things different in different geographic areas, because that's not true. We need to be all doing things the right way. We need to be treating the public honestly, fairly, and equally in all of our practices as practitioners. These things we should know by now. Nothing has changed yet until Saturday morning at 12:01. Buyer representations are here to stay. MLS rules will be, if not already, taking effect to remove compensation fields and languages, and that this is not just about the buy side. This is also a lot about the listing side as far as changes to our practice. As far as the forms are concerned, we know we've been seeing a lot of the forms updates, and we're going to talk about some of that today, but we're not done. We will likely see forms changes for a while. I can't even begin to imagine, how long it's going to take to really iron all the corners down on the forms we're going to be using going forward. I can tell you that, that just based on conversations I've had in rooms of importance, that most of my expert cohorts believe that, we're, months away from having a full understanding of how this is going to play out in the trenches after the effective date. So, continue to watch the resources, watch the good sources of information. The 3-tier organization that we're a part of has been hammering us with updates and resources. Please take your information from them with your coffee and stay away from the water cooler conversations, and watch what you're consuming away and at the water cooler, online and chat rooms and all those things. Be careful. Be careful not only what you believe, but be careful what you say. And then we really know, I think we know this at this point, we need to be working on our skills. We know the settlement is a good thing for our industry as a whole, and we need to ramp up our professional development. And then our managing brokers, this is our opportunity to shine, if you will, to really be proactive with our agent cadres and train and practice and work with them. Be there, be proactive for your agents. There are countless teaching moments in all of my presentations, but I did add a little what I'm calling the DR star to a lot of my slides. These are the clues to my managing broker cohorts that this may be a teaching opportunity for you. And this presentation is another nudge to pay attention to what's going on. So let's kind of roll into this. We've talked about how we are a highly regulated industry. We have a lot of eyes on what we do, and we know that for right now that the big eyes on us are our own organization, which includes our code of ethics and some changes forthcoming in our license law. And also, our MLS rules have changed or are changing to comply with the mandate. So, but keep in mind, it's not, we're not in a simple society, so to say, with regards to our business practices. We have to stay inside all of these curbs at all times. So we know that these are the drivers to what the changes are right now. So just reiterating that a little bit. And then just that brief recap I alluded to, a lot has happened since the settlement announcement on March 15th. The agreement, if it is finally approved in whole in November, will end all the litigation based on the original suits and copycats. And we should all know by now the 5 essential terms of the agreement: the release of liability, disclosure of compensation moved off the MLS, written buyer representation agreements in use, and that NAR would make no admission of guilt because they haven't been guilty anyway. They have never said anything other than that commissions are negotiable. So, and then of course they have already begun their financial obligation to the class action. Here's the current timeline as provided by NAR. Nothing has changed on this as far as I know. We are right at the action required point there, bottom center. And we know that at midnight on Saturday morning that we will be experiencing a new, we'll have a new experience on our MLS, specifically speaking to MRED in this case. MRED will be removing all those fields at midnight, and we'll talk briefly about MRED a little later in the presentation. Lastly, we know that the Department of Justice investigation is still ongoing. That is in the appeal process right now, but I don't know exactly what that all means yet. And I think that whatever it means, it doesn't affect the obligations we have with regards to the lawsuit settlement mandate effectiveness on the 17th. So it doesn't affect that. The DOJ is always free to investigate any organization or entity. And, I don't know, right now they're looking to tear apart Google. So maybe, maybe they'll be busy working on that one for a while. We'll see. And then, at the end of the day, we have to move forward under the mandate. And as I mentioned earlier, a lot of proper practice and protocol under the mandate is to treat everyone fairly and honestly in terms of the public, but also each other. We need, there's a lot of things that we're all trying to figure out in our practices right now with regards to, more specifically, the handling of cooperative compensation. So we need to really study that and be able to take the time to articulate that value, and also, explaining compensation and MLS policy to our clients. So, and of course, we want to remind the public that as realtors, we believe in home ownership for all Americans. So, that's part of our, our goal or our mission as individual realtors is to help our fellow country folk to realize the American dream and work hard. We work hard to help them to realize that. Lastly, on the settlement, we know that final approval is scheduled in a November court date, but that nothing that we're going to work as if it is finally approved. That's been the methodology and the approach with NAR and all their guidance. 0 is a real number. Listing agreements are changing as well to further decouple the sell side from the buy side. So it's not just buyer brokerage agreements that have changed to explain compensation in a more transparent way, but it's also listing agreements. And then until this weekend, co-op fees are there, but we're in the final few days here with being able to see that. So we need to be ready to acquire and accumulate that information by other means once those fields are removed from our multiple listing system. And just a reminder, we're not the only state that is looking to mandate the use of buyer representation agreements. Illinois is actually a little slower than usual with stuff like this. Our effective date for the license law change will be January 1st of 25, which is when not only will we be dealing with the mandate requirements under the Code of Ethics and MLS rules, but at that moment in time, it will also be a violation of license law to not be in a written buyer representation agreement with our clients. So I do have that slide in a few minutes. So keep up with the conversation. We're going to talk about a little bit about brokerage agreements. We're not here to tell you what kind of policy to have as far as whether to use exclusive or non-exclusive agreement. for your clients. You know, whatever our managing brokers decide will be their policy or non-policy on these things. That is up to the individual brokerage. But you do, or you should have something in policy to support your agents so that they know, and again, training, make sure you train your agents on that you have in use or in policy. Also, you know, we need to know the difference between agency disclosures and brokerage agreements. Long have we had it in our license law in Illinois that we must make agency disclosures at an appropriate, conspicuous time. Typically, that's at first encounter with members of the public. Once they start talking to us about things that could be potentially confidential, we have to square up our realtor hat, and we have to give our agency disclosure information to them and or documents. But that is not to be confused with a brokerage agreement. Now, that said, most of the new brokerage agreements I've seen, including Illinois Realtors, do make the agency disclosure. So again, first encounter, we must disclose agency, and before we tour property, we must have our buyer clients sign a written brokerage agreement. So kind of hand in hand, but that's two separate things. But we should be able to accomplish those two things in the one agreement. Also, we need to realize that there is a huge difference between concessions and compensation / commissions. When we're talking about things with our clients, with their lenders, please don't confuse compensation and commissions with concessions. Concessions are different. Concessions are things that the seller and buyer agree to in order to negotiate the terms of the contract, to provide you know, things such as carpet allowances, or for sellers to pay buyers part of buyers title costs, or those types of concessions. Compensation is not part of concessions. So please don't be confused about that. When you're talking to your client and lenders about where compensation goes, it is not part of the compensation and commission equation. So please separate those in your vernacular. And you know, we need to train on this, because you know, we have about 80 agents on the brokers on the call today. That is only a small segment of our membership. So, you know, managing brokers, you know, please take these things back to your office meetings and talk to your agents about these things. Make sure they understand these differences, disclosures and brokerage agreements, and concessions and compensation specifically. You know, and then just again, this is sort of back to the water cooler. You know, the public is listening. You know, they're listening to a lot of misinformation because the mainstream media tends to glorify what's going on. I'm not sure what, if anything, we're going to see in media between now and the settlement, whether or not it's already, if we're already old news in this regard, or if anything's going to pop up on the effective date out there. I hope not. I hope it stays quiet, because I think the media has done some damage to the understanding of how our industry works and how brokerage works. But either way, you know, make sure that we know the right answers, and you know, talk to the public off the cliff if we have to, about what the truth in the matter really is. And then, you know, use materials in your consultations to help you articulate some of this if you have to. All right, we all know we've been through this quite a bit. You know, one of the things I just wanted to loop back on, the red bold last bullet there, you know, you may not accept compensation that exceeds the rate that you've agreed to with your buyer or your seller. So when we talk about the brokerage agreement in a little bit, we're going to talk about you know, where the compensation is inserted into both the buyer brokerage agreement, and then, you know, from a seller's perspective, you know, we're not looking at listing agreements today because we have a wide variety of listing agreements in use across our 4 association geography and everywhere in between and beyond. But you know, we have to know that whatever we have in our agreement with our client, that is the maximum fee for service that we can accept. That is part of the mandate. So be clear and transparent when you're talking to the client about our compensation. You know, it's not against the rules to renegotiate your agreements with your clients. However, you know, if you do that in the heat of a moment, that looks self-serving and is not advised. So, you know, don't add to the problems, you know, just be part of the solution at this time. And again, compensation can't be open-ended. It has to be specific and attributable to the side of the transaction that you're working on. So the new agreements, all of them that I've seen, and I've seen a lot, because it's been my life the last several months to review documents that are out there to try and, you know what the best verbiage is for localizing them. You know, just know that, you know, part of what's in the agreements covers us in the mandate. We just have to use those fields correctly. And then I did mention it, you know, effective January 1, the bills in the Illinois General Assembly that set forth to create the provision where in our license law that all brokerage agreements shall be in writing and may be exclusive or non-exclusive. You know, the law will say brokerage agreements. That includes both buyers and sellers. You know, we already know our listing agreement or agreements well. We know that there's some updates based on compensation, but we've already been doing listing agreements in writing. So we've been doing that. We've been making designated agency disclosure, hopefully in our listing agreements. Now we'll be doing the same thing on the buyer side. And it will, as I mentioned, be part of our license law. If the governor signs this, you know, and I'm understanding that that's shortly to happen here, that will be effective January 1. And then pay attention to our CE changes, because there's a few CE changes wrapped into that legislation as well. You know, we've talked about all these things. You know, better conversations about compensations with the public. You know, brokerage representation agreements must be used and used correctly. Communicate and articulate our value, and be able to dispel the myths with the public as far as the misinformation that may be out there. And, you know, we have to make sure that we're not adding to that fire, so to say. We want to make sure that whatever we're telling the public, it's good information. So grab your information from the local, state, and national association website resource pages, and you know, pay attention to what's being taught. A few things that still need to be done out there as far as all this is concerned. We know that the lending institutions are still trying to get a handle on allowing the buyer to fund the buyer side compensation. we have no idea where this is going to land. I can tell you that that NAR and our lobby teams have been working furiously with the GSEs and the government-backed entities, Freddie, Fannie, FHA, VA, USDA, RD, all the loan conforming loan providers that are out there to talk and have these conversations about how and if the lender will be allowed to show these things on their side of the settlement the ALTA statements. So works in progress. I will tell you, the VA has already made some temporary considerations, and I haven't heard, if we're close in any of our other conversations, but our lobby and our national leadership team have been in meetings with these entities. So pay attention, stay tuned. We know that that also title procedures may need to change to some degree as well. So again, paying attention to where that goes. Specific rules and guidelines will still need to be developed in a lot of these areas. This even includes, future changes to our code of ethics. I know that our professional standards committee at NAR has already been busy looking at a lot of things relative to the mandate. Their meetings in November, I'm sure, and preceding meetings will be robust. Rules from our MLSs, rules from our states that have already accepted or legislated to have written buyer brokerage agreements. We know that we have a lot to pay attention to. Thank your advocacy committee members at all your local associations for any engagement that they have at the local, state, and national level when it comes to these things, because I can tell you it's been a lot of work and will continue to be a lot of work by both our paid staff and our volunteers as well. Mention the code of ethics. And then, as far as our brokerage agreements are concerned, we're probably not one and done with current updates. Again, as things are discovered and learned as we move forward, look for regular updates, because I'm sure that that's more of a promise than a threat, as I mentioned earlier. Managing brokers, policy changes, training opportunities are needed. Empower your agents to embrace the changes, and because we don't want to look awful to the public. We need to raise our bar of professionalism. We need to have the answers that the public deserves and needs, and educating, training, retraining, adjusting the policies as may be needed, and then working with your agents, and of course demand compliance for your own sake from your agents. Take back any responsibility that you've lost for training and supervising. On the listing side, we've talked about these things on our previous sessions. Setting policy is a business decision, and as I mentioned in my disclaimer up front, I am not here to tell you what policies to set or not to set, but you need to consider whether you're going to have policies on a lot of things. Are you going to have policies on listing side compensation minimums? Are you going to have policy on whether or not it's the agent's decision how to set the commissions that are allowed at your brokerage? Are you going to have policy on whether to allow variable rates when it comes to working your listings with unrepresented buyers or buyers in dual agency. Will variations be allowed by your agents if they have long-standing clients or investment clients that they're used to doing different commissions for? All these things should be considered. And then of course, you know, a policy, do you need a policy on what to do if a listing client, a seller decides not to offer cooperative compensation at all? You know, what policies might you have for that? I don't know the answer for your brokerage, but you need to consider these things and then make sure that you share these insights and your policies with your brokers. Make sure they know how to navigate these things. You know, and then lastly on this slide, just reminding everybody that as a part of the mandate, we have a prohibition now on offering buyer agents bonuses of any kind, because this is in fact steering other buyer brokers to your listing because you have offered additional compensation to the buyer broker. This is 100% self-serving. This is not putting the public first when it comes to our compensation. You know, we need to talk to our sellers instead about incentivizing the buyer. Talked about that. You know, if you continue to do these bonuses, you're effectively saying that if you show my property, I'll compensate you higher. And this is, as I said, this is steering, and this is one of the big reasons why the Department of Justice has been all up in our stuff about being self-serving, and it will be a violation. So just know that, like I said, don't add to the problems. And you know, like I said, you know, seller can make concessions. They can do some of these things instead of offering buyer broker bonuses. There are, of course, there are other things that a seller can do to incentivize, and all of these things become negotiable in the purchase contract. Articulating our value. And before I move to that slide, you know, we've talked about this. I'll show you resources in a little bit, but you know, we need to not just articulate value to the buy side client, but also to our sellers. I think that, you know, our compensation is in question on all ends, because in fact the lawsuits were sellers suing NAR and the other named entities. So, you know, it's the seller consumers felt harmed to the point where, you know, that those suits came about. So so we have, you know, so to say, some damage control to do with the sellers community as well when it comes to articulating what we do for our fees, for, you know, what, for the services and the fees that we provide and charge. Make sure they understand how hard we work for them. We've talked about this before. This is kind of the crux of the changes to our listing and our buyer brokerage agreements when it comes to how compensation is laid out in the agreements. Our agreements should no longer start by naming the total compensation. In other words, a lot of our listing agreements used to say, you know, the listing broker will charge the seller X as a total, and then they will break out a piece of that and give it in cooperative compensation to a cooperative buyer's broker. Now, to make things fully transparent, the format is more like what you see at the bottom there. It's a this plus that equals the total. And again, mentioning that if you as representing the seller or the buyer, if especially on the listing side, if there's a potential for doing or not doing dual agency, you can only keep the fee that's commensurate with the listing side compensation. You cannot keep compensation that was destined to go to a buyer if there is no buyer representative. You cannot just, so to say, keep the whole total compensation. Justice has been all up in it because we've not been transparent with the commensurate fees that we charge. So please, make sure that you are following this model. Make sure that that if there is no buyer representative, or if the buyer seeks dual agency, that there is a potential variable consideration in your listing agreement, or you're not entitled to the buyer's side fees if you're not representing the buyer side. So another teaching moment. Like I said, you can't keep the total commission on the listing side if you haven't spelled that out in your listing agreement in full transparency. And honestly, the public has always deserved to know this. So shame on us for all these years if we've been not practicing that way to begin with. All right, reminding everybody of the resources. I did add the MRED settlement website. This is where we as practitioners should be getting our information from. One of my friends and instructor cohorts said it, I think, best. Hanging out on masterminds out on social media where there isn't a master or a mind among them is probably not a good place to be getting your information from. Use your energy to focus on raising your bar of professionalism. Stop and really think about, even if you're watching, commenting is another thing. Commenting on, in some of these mastermind rooms and groups, like we've said with, advertising issues on social media. I mean, once you publish that, you can't take it back. And really think about, not only what you're saying, but whether you should be saying anything at all. Leave the belly aching to others and just focus on becoming a better practitioner. Don't put yourself out there. Hold your opinions a little closer to your own vest when it comes to some of these things. But take your information from good resources. I'm just going to cruise through these slides because we've shown these resources before. Competition.realtor and facts.realtor, both at the national level and at the state level, we have infographics available to us. Consider using some of these pieces in your presentation packets. They're great pieces. I will just, one last time, focus on the infographic, the economics of buying a home. Of all of the pieces, I think this one holds a lot of weight and value when it comes to helping to explain to a seller client the disparity between the amount of money that most buyers have ready and available when it comes time to consider purchasing a home. It talks about how in the typical American household bank account, there's about $5,300, and the average median down payment for a starter home, which is, by the way, only 7%, is about $16,000. So we can see that buyers they already don't have enough liquid cash ready to, be ready to purchase a home sometimes. Sometimes they're borrowing money from family, sometimes they're looking for down payment assistance. But, when it comes to preparing your seller for the what ifs, when it comes to what they're doing or not doing with cooperative compensation, this is a great piece to have in your presentation packet. Also, if your social media, putting things out consumer facing, NAR has two great lists of short content pieces that can help you to articulate your value, what we do to make ourselves worth every penny of our compensation. All right. Bottom line, we must get better on both sides of representation. So, practice your skills, work on your scripts, think about the things that you struggle with to explain to the public, both buyers and sellers, and then work with a buddy in the office or with your managing broker. Yes, these things are time consuming, scary, but they are necessary to being good practitioners, and as is famously said, practice makes perfect. And do role play with your cohorts and with your managing broker to improve your ability to explain your way through these changes. A few reminders. I mean, we are in control of how we get compensated. So, take control and ownership of that with the public. Make sure they understand why you're worth what you're worth. Help the buyer to understand that they are, in fact, paying for everything at the closing table. So, when it comes to net factoring in the terms and all the consideration in making offers or accepting offers, we have to help the buyer understand that they are in control of, saying yes to and agreeing to a final version of a contract, which includes all and could potentially even by addendum. So, work on those scripts. And then, of course, let them know, even if the seller is not offering cooperative compensation readily, that that doesn't preclude them as buyers for asking the seller to compensate your broker representative via addendum or via the contract for those contracts that have already incorporated those provisions. The buyer has the options, if there's if the scenario is such where there's not cooperative compensation and they can't afford to pay a buyer broker out of their pocket, then they should have the option of not viewing the property. But that said, do not steer them away from said property. Talk to them, get their instructions as far as what they want to do or not to do. I would believe that the best practice would be to talk to them individually, about one property at a time before you go tour, and remind them of whether or not there's compensation or not. And therefore, if they fall in love with the property, then they already have that understanding that they may need to bake some things in. Well, they need to bake everything into their offer consideration anyway. So, be proactive with that information to your client. And of course, they have the choice of paying you the compensation via your buyer brokerage agreement, if that's part of your buyer brokerage agreement. And then they can always, it's always a good idea to ask the seller in writing to include what they are planning to pay in cooperative compensation. So broker to broker compensation agreements are or should be considered for use. That way you have it in writing from the listing managing broker to as to what, if any, cooperating compensation there may be. Again, you're working proactively for your buyer. Don't not ask for this information. Your buyer deserves to know these things before they see the property. We've talked about, pre-purchase consultations. We've talked about the fact that we spend, an hour to an hour and a half with every one of our sellers before they sign the listing agreement. And we talk all through process and preparation. How much time are you spending with a buyer before you show them houses? So I deploy you to think about seriously your buyer consultations. We need to spend equal effort with our buyer clients to prepare them for the process and get them ready to go out and look at property. So it's also where we set all our expectations with them. So, using that pre-consultation to talk about everything we need to talk about in terms of the mandate and business practice and process and financing and working with third-party professionals like home inspectors and attorneys, all the things that need to be or should be discussed in fairness with a buyer in an environment that's calm and not on fire because they're standing in the house of their dreams. And we're trying to explain all these things like a fire drill, and they're not going to hear it because all they want to hear at that moment in time is, how do we get this house? What do we have to do to get this house? So do these things that you need to do in advance. You've probably heard me say it before. I'm a proponent of killing the monsters while they're young. So set the expectations in pre-consultation so that you don't have to worry about those things between the driveway and the front door, when you don't have time to properly explain things. This is just great advice. Your forms are your scripts. You've probably heard me say that before. Going through the forms to explain them, you need to develop that into your scripting process. You need to explain those forms so that the consumer understands what they mean and that they can get their questions answered. Also, I'm a proponent of sending things in advance. So when it comes to setting expectations or providing forms that they may need to review or sign, send them out, get them into their hands, let them review those before you get together. It makes those conversations go quicker once you do. Value proposition, we've talked about this. What's yours? Is it unique? How much time are you going to promise your buyers to help get them ready? Embracing the buyer's agreements. Setting, like you said, set your value where it belongs on whichever side you're representing. And, there is a disparity out there as far as, all agents are different. Some agents don't have a problem explaining their value. Other agents may think that they are worth a lot more or less than other agents. So, confidence building is important, which means practicing in preparation. Make work to make yourself better. That's the message there. Discuss, being able to discuss your brokerage agreements, making agency disclosures and brokerage agreements, and talking to them about how you're going to represent them. Having that signed brokerage agreement, justifying your compensation model and creating buyer loyalty, and an understanding from the public as to how we get compensated. All right. Let's move into the forms. More often than not, these forms are coming from your associations, local and state mostly, but they also may be coming from your office, brokerage, franchise, or your attorneys. Check with your respective brokerages as far as the forms that you should be using specifically based on policy and compliance with your errors and omission insurance. We know that the forms changes that we're seeing are in some cases preemptive, but in line with the mandate provisions. Some of what we know the Department of Justice has been asking us for, preparing for the likely changes to the License Act, and then of course in compliance with contract law and fair housing as well. Again, I'll re-mention it. Make sure you know the difference. Agency disclosures versus agreements or contracts. There is a difference. Disclosures are provided in writing and acknowledged, and agreements are contracts. So they have to, agreements and contracts must be in writing and signed to be enforceable. In a lot of cases, disclosures that we make don't require signatures or even acknowledgement. We just have to provide the public sometimes with said disclosures and then document that in our file that we've given those disclosures. All right, so looking at some specific forms, I've got a list here of important forms that we already are probably aware of. The buyer agency checklist form, I have gone over that in previous sessions. You can develop your buyer consultation scripts or some of them from that checklist. That checklist is awesome because it covers a lot of the things that we have to or are supposed to cover, all the CYA stuff to protect us as brokers and our brokerages. Also, as far as agency, dual agency, non-agency forms are concerned, these should all be familiar. The disclosure and consent to dual, the notice of no agency, the 349 form, which we've been encouraging the use of. However, just so everyone knows that that form is currently obsolete. Illinois Realtors did pull it down from their website because it did not incorporate one of the new form numbers in terms of the new brokerage agreements that they released. So therefore, it is not currently available. We haven't been able to get answers yet as to whether it will be made updated and available. So stay tuned on that. But in the meantime, know that your brokerage agreement does make the agency designated agency disclosure. So again, at first encounter, we need to be covering that with the public. So on the buy side, of course, we're doing it on the sell side with our listing agreement. But on the buy side, we need to make sure that we're making that agency disclosure as well as having them to sign the written agreement. So we are covered in that regard as long as we do that at first encounter. So in other words, as soon as the buyer, prospect, member of the public starts talking to us about things that could potentially be confidential, we need to be in the disclosure mode with regards to agency. So open houses are also affected in this regard. We're not going down that rabbit hole today, though. So also know that the consumer guide to real estate agency in Illinois, that pamphlet, can also be used to make disclosure for agency, and that can be used for really all agency, because that that guide, which I've not always been a proponent of over the 349, but that guide does talk about designated agency and dual agency. So so know that that is available. So we're not going to look at these today, just kind of reminding everyone of these. So this list that you see before you is a list of all of the Illinois Realtor forms that have been updated to the website as of last night, effective for July, August. So all of these forms are dated either July or August, and are the forms now that are replacing all the previous versions. So I bolded two of these forms. We're going to look at the explainer document briefly, and then we're going to look at the 338 exclusive right to acquire contract with dual agency. And this is for training purposes. Please know that the old 338 form has been broken into two forms. So if you remember the old 338 form, you know that section 1 had two options, either the option for exclusive right to acquire or the option for exclusive buyer representation. So they broke out the exclusive buyer representation own form. It is now form 337, or the non-exclusive forms. So choosing to look at the 338 in our session today is not to say that this is the form you should use at your brokerage. It is just, I'm going to train on this form a little bit because it is probably the most protective for the brokerage in terms of all these forms. So the other version of the exclusive and then the non-exclusive forms give the buyer a lot of latitude to go around or outside of our assistance. So, again, business decision. So managing brokers, broker owners, contemplate what you would or would not want to do with regards to policy in terms of what forms you want your agents to use or not to use. That is entirely up to you. So, that's my disclaimer on this. Also, Illinois Realtors did update the 342 and the 425. Those are the listing agreements. So as I said, there are so many listing agreements out there. It's up to, again, the brokerage to decide which documents they want to use. But all of these forms in this section have the updates to make us mandate compliant. So look to your other entities, local associations, brokerages, franchises, if you're typically using other listing agreements other than the states. That, again, that's business decision at the brokerage. Just, you have choices, I suppose. So, consider what works best for you. And then lastly, there's a couple of forms that came out in the last couple days. And we'll look briefly at the affirmation to seller's broker and the two compensation disclosures that they're providing to us. So let's first take a look at the explainer document. I put the name of the document above the forms themselves just so you can have that reference. And I'm not reading this today, and I'm only showing you pages 1 and 2 because the first 2 pages of the document talk about giving the title and short descriptions for each of the new forms. So again, the non-exclusive and exclusive brokerage agreements, contracts, and then the seller brokerage agreements. So buyer and seller brokerage agreements. And of course, the seller brokerage agreements are all exclusive. So, so brief descriptions of what they are. Pages 3 and 4 go on to elaborate, and of course there's some general use statements from Illinois Realtors there, sort of course, their disclaimers as far as use of these forms. I will tell you that if any of you have looked at the new set of forms, they have completely reformatted. They've sort of gone away from the all text look, and they've incorporated some enhanced graphics. In the cases of most of the forms, their form numbers are located in the footer. But my personal opinion, and my jury's still out, I'm not sure if the framing graphics are going to scan and transmit very well. So we'll see. I'm being optimistic in my thinking, but I do worry about the graphics of the new look in that regard. So sorry, Illinois Realtors, that's just an opinion. All right, so that was the explainer document. Then moving on to the 338 form, I'm going to kind of quickly go through these one page at a time. There's 7 pages. I will tell you before I start that I do think, and then I guess contrary, I'm going to give some kudos to Illinois Realtors in terms of the simplicity of the text areas, or the content, the actual content of the form. I do think that once you've read through it, that it should make pretty good sense to you. I think it's easier to explain than the previous versions. So I think that this should help our agents to better be able to present to their buyer prospects these documents. So all right, so starting with the 338, this is the exclusive right to acquire contract, which includes dual agency. And I'm not going to belabor or spend a lot of time going through. I just want you to be able to see what's here. Everything in sections and paragraphs, no line numbers, just paragraph numbers. So, we identify the parties, and then paragraph 1 immediately makes the designated agency disclosure. So we talked about, in lieu of the old 349 form, we have it here. The exclusive right to acquire provision. Please read and understand this, because the old 338 form, before they broke out the second option into its own 337 form, gave the agent and the buyer the opportunity to make that election as part of going through the form. So again, business practice as far as what forms you want to use at your brokerage, you may decide you want to let agents make those decisions on their own. Again, should be policy as far as those types of considerations. But the exclusive right to acquire definition essentially means that anything that the buyer acquires while they're in an agreement with you, they should or would owe you compensation in the terms of your agreement. So so look at that as opposed to what the other forms are providing for. The non-exclusives obviously get loose with regards to the buyer being able to go elsewhere to find and acquire property. So it depends again on business decision and to what degree you're trying to create loyalty with your client prospects. with regards to the duration, you've got the same provisions that were in the old version, start, effective date and termination date. The auto renewal feature is there. If you want to use that, you really need to check one or the other. I will just say, as far as signing these agreements with your clients, we have to know that once we go into an agreement, that we are bound to work with this client for the term. So unlike maybe current methodology or concept, where we have no agreement, we're basically working with the member of public in good faith and open-ended. We have to think about actually binding them into what length of time. So I've encouraged some agents to take short-term agreements if they're not sure that they want to work with this client long-term. Take the contract for a week or a month, as opposed to a longer term if you're not sure whether you want to work with this client long-term. So again, business decisions to be considered and made. Page 2 gets into the duties, what duties the buyer has, what duties the brokerage has, what duty the buyer will have. Page 3 goes into the compensation. So paragraph 5 talks about the fee for service, whether it'll be a flat fee or a percentage or something different. So it gives you some space to write in alternative terms as well. And then please note there at the bottom of paragraph 5 what it says, that the brokerage company may not receive compensation from any source that exceeds the amount or rate agreed to with the buyer. So again, no, and here we're affirming it to the public that we're only going to take what our agreement says for a commensurate fee for the services we're agreeing to provide. So don't get lost in thinking that if the cooperative compensation from a brokerage is exceeding what your buyer brokerage agreement says, that you can still take that. You cannot. You will need to notify the listing office that per your buyer brokerage agreement, you are only able to take whatever it is you're allowed to take in terms of a fee for your service, and that they should, when they're preparing their commission statement for closing, that they should notify the closer, i.e. title company or escrow company, of what that will need to be. We may need to provide our own brokerage commission statement to the closer in the future. So as we're separating, decoupling seller side from buyer side, we may need to embrace that practice, not just as a listing broker, but as a buyer broker providing like compensation commission statements to title company for closing. And then I think that the rest of what's here should be self-explanatory. There is a protection period provision, a number of days, paragraph 6 representing other buyers. Paragraph 7 goes into dual agency. In this version of the 338, the 338A would not have the disclosure and consent to dual agency in it, but it goes through all of the dual agency provisions that we see mirrored in the dual agency disclosure forms. So and possibly in your listing agreements as well. But all that said, that's all in here. as it always has been. Page 5 just goes on to mention the provisions about previous representation, things that the buyer needs to understand, if there's a failure to close. And also, as a brokerage company and a designated agent, we may be recommending that they use other professional services. Those third parties that I mentioned, some of them already, attorneys, architects, contractors, home inspectors, attorneys, tax preparers, all those other surveyors, all those other potential services that a buyer may need to deploy in the process or consider deploying. Paragraph 11 suggests that, yes, there may be fees for some of those third-party services. It has an indemnification paragraph, a no assignment paragraph, a non-discrimination paragraph. Page 6 goes into modification, electronic signatures, and recording. We need to be talking to our buyers and our sellers about the Illinois Eavesdropping Act as far as recording and surveillance is concerned. We should always be telling our buyers to assume that they're being fully recorded if they're in a property, and to reserve all conversation until after they've left the property, because even Ring doorbells can hear conversations out at the street. So, talk to your buyers about taking their conversations with you to discuss the property on the road, make it a road show, or go back to the office or the coffee shop to have those conversations. And then as this page wraps up, there's a couple of last paragraphs, a wire fraud statement talking to the buyers about transferring funds. That could be earnest money or mortgage loan funding. And then the consent to contact. The buyer agrees that the brokerage company is allowed to contact them. So it's not just the broker or designated agent. It may also be the broker, managing broker, or company representative that may need to contact the client, because that's who the agreement is with. So when it comes to listing agreements and buyer broker agreements, make sure you're filling the agents need to make sure they're filling in all that information about contacts for their clients, because the contact information isn't just for you as the agent, it's for the brokerage as well. The brokerage needs that information because they truly do own the relationship with the client. So they need that contact information as much as you do. Lastly is the agreement page. So, no need to belabor that. It's, these are the authorized signers, who's signing on behalf of the brokerage. And that's pretty much that form. So again, look those up, review those, talk to your agents about the, which forms you want them using. Also, I mentioned I would just take a quick look at the other 3 most recently released forms from Illinois Realtors. Okay, the affirmation to seller's broker. My slideshow back working here. That is just an affirmation from the buyer's broker to the seller's broker that there is a written buyer representation agreement with the buyer that they're showing or writing an offer for. So when a seller says, I want to see a copy of your buyer's brokerage agreement, by based on confidentiality, we do not automatically owe that to the seller. We should be looking at using this affirmation form instead of sending the brokerage agreement without the buyer's consent to a seller, because there is confidential information in that agreement. So make sure you're keeping your buyer client's information confidential. If you got that request before you, have the conversation with the seller or with your buyer client to suggest that you are more comfortable just sending them the affirmation. And then these two disclosure statements, one for sellers, one for buyers. I think that where we would potentially see these used is potentially in our listing and our buyer brokerage packets. Just a disclosure statement that says that essentially it's a notice to the buyer or the seller that the agent's compensation is negotiable and not set by law. So short forms, same thing with the buyer version of that. All right, just, touching on other forms. We know that our local associations provide us various forms as well. You may have a brokerage to compensation form with your association, or proactively by potentially suggesting to our agents to fill one of those out at the time they submit their listing agreements to their brokerage, so that the agent has a ready scan broker to broker compensation form for potential buyer broker inquiries, that it can be scanned or emailed off quickly, so that any buyer broker who is inquiring can get that information before they show the property to a buyer. On the multi-board front, as far as the multi-board forms are concerned, the seller agreement to pay buyer brokerage compensation addendum, I do want to look at that real quick. I know that 3 of our associations on today have access to their version of this form. This form is for the buyer to use to submit with an offer to ask the seller to pay the buyer brokerage compensation. So again, it's a short, easy to use addendum. The first half of the form pretty much talks about the parties involved. The subparagraphs talk about the addendum, and that it is a seller to buyer agreement. And paragraph 4 provides for the potential buyer brokerage compensation request. So we can addend this form to the 7.0. We write it in on the other documents attached line, which is just before the 7.0 contract goes into its optional provisions. So just above line 370. And this is the brand new version, by the way. This version was just released this past week to the local associations that license it from the multi-board. A really quick comment on the 8.0 draft that's in progress. That rewrite or drafting committee has been meeting since this past June, and will continue to meet to develop a new 8.0 version of the multi-board contract to purchase. You can't hold me to any promises as far as when that will be ready. The committee would love to see it ready for January 1st. But again, it's a major process. I can just put it that way, I guess, you know, making the next version of this. There's so much to consider as far as potential changes and updates. So, you know, we've been scratching away at the document paragraph or section by section. So, so know that that's coming. So stay tuned on that. In the meantime, as far as using the 7.0, everything is good with it. Just know that you have the addendum if you're going to request, if your buyer is going to request the seller to pay brokerage compensation. The idea, I guess, will be that that addendum will likely roll into the 8.0 regular body of content. So so that's the initial discussion, is to move the addendum into the contract. So again, no promises yet. Lots of discussion and work to be done still. You know, again, we've mentioned it. Forms are going to be updated forever, but likely for a while. We're going to need to pay attention to our updates. But when we do get the updates, you've got to get a hold of them. You're as managing brokers, broker owners, you need to be making sure that you're ahead of your agents on that curve, as far as making sure that you're aware of what's happening and what's going on, and then decide whether or not to use those or not. Continuing education, you know, we talked about professional development a lot. I'm still recommending these 4 designations and certifications as my core 4. If you're looking to raise your bar of professionalism and take these classes, they will all benefit you. The AVR is still being offered by NAR for free through the end of the year. So if you haven't earned your AVR designation yet, you know, go to the NAR website and just type in AVR in the search bar, and it'll take you where you need to go. Agents, we know you have a lot of concerns, but we're all working through these. You know, you gotta get past the fear, though, and anxiety of it all, and just get comfortable in the changes. Read, research, and join positive discussions. Seek out credible information. As far as the MLS is concerned, again, 3 of the 4 of us are on MRED. MRED did a presentation to the associations just this past week, and they went through everything that's changing in MRED. We've talked about what's changing at midnight on the 17th. You know, the removal of cooperating compensation fields of all versions. So there will be no field left in MRED after August 17th that had the word compensation in it. We've covered that. These are the fields that are being removed. We showed this in our last presentation, as did MRED in their presentation. So you can see all of these fields said compensation in them. So that these will all be gone or removed from the MLS Connect listing add edit sections. Just a reminder, as far as publishing compensation is concerned, that any aggregated website, which includes MLSs, cannot have any compensation information published within them. So this includes these, but not just these. It includes all things aggregated. Any website that receives a data feed from an MLS or an aggregator falls into this category of no, you cannot publish compensation there. So Where you can publish compensation is on your own branded website or on your company's office branded website. Again, as always, know your office policy. Managing brokers, make sure you're communicating with your agents as to what you're going to allow or not. Just again with value, we talk to the public about our value. Part of our value is our participation in the MLS, being able to market their property to the maximum number of agents, and it all equals more buyers, faster sale, highest price. So, and then that our compensation rewards our buyer agent efforts. Lastly, managing brokers. I know we've kind of covered most of these things. Be part of the solution, support your agents, train them, make sure they have you as a resource, make sure you know everything you should know, and take a leadership role. I think I mentioned it in one of my last slides here. We need to lead, not just manage at this moment. Agents, please know that your buyers choose which properties to see. So have good conversations with them to prepare them, but ultimately they get to decide which properties they want to see. Don't steer them away from things just because there is no cooperative compensation. And again, just a reminder, stop the practice of saying over here, out there, what we do, what they do. Those kinds of things can and will get us into trouble. Treat everybody the same. The sky is not falling. DRs, change leads to better. Attitude. Compensation isn't the only problem your agents are facing. Help understand the agent's client journey. Sharing value isn't everything. It's not all of it. It's not enough. We need to do more. Establish policies, raise the level of service, provide good updates and training, teach your agents to be good listeners, and to not comment online. We talked about that. Create a pre-purchase consultation program, send ahead and in advance content, role play with scripts, and support your agents. Make yourself available. Hold your agents accountable. If they're not practicing right, fix it. Don't treat all your agents the same. They are all different. They need different help in this moment. My Simon Sinek quote for today, we all know what we do. Some know how we do it. Few know why. So know your why. And again, as I mentioned, there is a difference between managing and leading. Yes, we have to manage day to day, but we also need to be leading. Adapt, sponge up the knowledge. I typically close on this one. It's never been more true. We need to work together in this time. We all need to be carrying the load, and we need to be proactively part of the solution, and not to continue to be part of the problems. The bad behavior of the few have affected the many when it's come to this mandate, the reason for the lawsuits. Let's not use creativity to add to the problems. Let's stay inside the guardrails and work our businesses professionally and ethically. And so with that, shameless plug, we are the Hometown Association is putting on a 7.0 contract training in Sterling, Illinois on the 21st. Watch for details on that. And with that, if Sharon is there, I know we have some questions. We're at 11:30 at this time. So, any questions that we can help field, if Heather wants to pause the recording or not, I'll leave that up to staff